I woke up screaming that night, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The nightmare was always the same. Brooke's laughter echoing through the halls of our childhood home, Ethan's whispered, promises turning to ash in my mouth, and my father's disappointed eyes as he took his last breath, believing I had abandoned him. But this time, when I jolted awake in my sparse Portland apartment, gasping for air, something was different. The manila folder on my nightstand seemed to glow in the darkness. Highest Shipping Group versus Brooke Hayes Vance. My sister's name, my former fiancé's signature, and suddenly, after 10 years of running, of building a new life under a new name, or of convincing myself that the past was dead and buried, fate had delivered them both right into my hands. The broken pen was still in my fist when Eleanor knocked on my office door that morning. I had snapped it clean in half the moment I saw those names. Black ink bleeding across the legal documents like a wound that had never healed. My paralegal's eyes widened when she saw my face. Whatever expression I was wearing, it was enough to make her take a step back. If you're enjoying this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Drop a comment below telling me what you would do in this situation. Your support means everything, but I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why seeing those names felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my still beating heart, you need to know how it all began. You need to understand who I was before I became the woman who could break a pen with her bare hands at the mere sight of her past. 10 years ago, I was Anya Hayes, the forgotten daughter of Richard Hayes, shipping magnate and New Haven royalty. I say forgotten because from the moment my mother died when I was 12, I became invisible in my own home. My father remarried within a year. Her name was Victoria, and she came with a daughter. Brooke! God! Brooke was everything I wasn't. Blonde where I was dark, confident where I was quiet, charming where I was earnest. She was 17 to my 12, and from the very first day, she made it clear that this was now her house. Her father, her life. I was just the ghost haunting the corners. I told myself it would get better, that once the newness wore off, Dad would remember he had another daughter. But Victoria was skilled in the art of manipulation, and Brooke learned from the master. Slowly, methodically, they began to erase me. It started small. My childhood photos disappeared from the mantel, replaced by portraits of Brooke. My mother's jewelry, which Dad had promised would be mine, suddenly became Brooke's sweet 16 gifts. When I protested, Victoria would sigh dramatically and say I was being selfish. That Brooke was my sister now. That family meant sharing. Dad worked constantly, building his empire, and when he was home, Victoria ensured he only saw what she wanted him to see. The dutiful stepdaughter helping with homework. The jealous biological daughter causing problems. I learned to stay quiet, to make myself smaller, to hope that if I was good enough, patient enough, loving enough, things would change. They never did. By the time I turned 18, I had become the family servant. I cooked. I cleaned. I ran errands, all while working part-time to save for college, because my father, one of the wealthiest men in Connecticut, somehow never had money for my education. Brooke, meanwhile, attended Yale on Dad's dime. He lived in a penthouse apartment he bought her, and drove a car that cost more than most people's houses. When I asked about college, Victoria looked at me with those cold blue eyes and said, "Darling, not everyone is cut out for higher education. Perhaps you could take some classes at the community college. We certainly can't afford to send 2 girls to university." I worked 3 jobs that year. I slept 4 hours a night. I applied for every scholarship I could find. And somehow, miraculously, I got into Boston University's pre-law program with a full ride. The day I got the acceptance letter, I was so excited, I actually believed things might change. I ran to show my father, bursting into his study, with the letter clutched in my shaking hands. He looked up from his paperwork, and for just a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Pride. Maybe. Recognition. Then Victoria glided in behind me, placed a manicured hand on his shoulder, and said, "Richard, darling, we need to talk about Brooke's trust fund. She wants to start her own fashion line." Dad turned back to his papers. I stood there, letter in hand, invisible once again, but Boston was my escape, and I took it. For the first time in 6 years, I could breathe. I threw myself into my studies, made real friends, and started to remember who I was before I became the girl who apologized for existing. That's when I met Ethan Vance. He was a business major, charismatic and ambitious, with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to see right through me. He was everything I thought I wanted: attentive, romantic, constantly telling me I was special, that I deserved better than what my family had given me. We dated for 2 years, and when he proposed during my senior year, I said yes without hesitation. I should have seen the signs. The way he always seemed a little too interested in my father's business, the questions about the company's financials that seemed too detailed for casual conversation, the way he insisted on meeting my family despite my reluctance, but I was young and stupid, and desperate to believe that someone could actually love me. The weekend I brought Ethan home to meet everyone was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it then. We arrived at the sprawling Hayes estate on a Friday evening. Brooke answered the door in a designer dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She took one look at Ethan and smiled that predatory smile I'd seen her use on countless men before. "So, you're the famous fiancé?" she purred, extending her hand. "I'm Brooke, the favorite sister." She said it like a joke, but we both knew it wasn't. I watched, helpless, as Brooke deployed every weapon in her arsenal: the casual touches on Ethan's arm, the inside jokes that excluded me, the way she'd lean close when she talked to him, her blonde hair brushing his shoulder. And Ethan, God help me, he ate it up. By Sunday night, I felt like a third wheel in my own engagement. But the real betrayal came after I returned to Boston. Ethan started coming home late, being vague about his whereabouts. He was distant, preoccupied. And when I'd try to talk about wedding plans, he'd change the subject. Then one night, my roommate Sarah showed me the photos. Ethan and Brooke, at a restaurant in Manhattan, his hand covering hers on the table. The way they looked at each other like I had never existed. I confronted him. He swore it was nothing, that Brooke had contacted him about a business opportunity, that I was being paranoid and jealous, just like my family always said. He turned it around on me so skillfully that I actually apologized. I apologized for not trusting him, for being insecure, for letting my damaged family dynamics poison our relationship. That's what they do. You know, the manipulators. They make you doubt your own eyes, your own instincts, your own reality. I tried to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. I focused on graduating, on studying for the LSAT, on planning a wedding that felt more like a funeral with each passing day. Ethan proposed we move the wedding to New Haven, closer to family, closer to Brooke. I should have said no. I should have run. But I was so tired of fighting, so desperate to believe this one thing in my life could work out. 3 months before the wedding, my father collapsed in his office. Massive stroke. The doctors said he had weeks, maybe days. I dropped everything and came home, my heart breaking at the thought of losing him before we ever really had a chance to reconnect. The man I found in that hospital bed was a ghost of the father I remembered. Weak, frightened, suddenly so small. But when he saw me, his eyes cleared, and he reached for my hand. "Anya?" he whispered. "My girl. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Those were the words I'd waited years to hear, and they were coming too late. But I held his hand and told him I forgave him, because what else do you say to a dying man? Over the next 2 weeks, I barely left his side. I read to him, played his favorite music, helped the nurses care for him. Brooke would breeze in occasionally, usually with photographers or society reporters in tow, playing the devoted daughter for the cameras. Victoria was there even less. "Too busy," she said, managing the company and making arrangements. What arrangements? I didn't know. I was too focused on my father, on memorizing the feeling of his hand in mine, on trying to say everything I'd never gotten to say. One night, when we were alone, Dad squeezed my hand weakly. "The company," he rasped. "I'm leaving it to you. You're the one with the head for it. The integrity. I've already changed the will. Eleanor Porter knows. She'll help you." Eleanor Porter was Dad's personal attorney, a sharp woman in her 60s who'd worked with him for decades. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. But I didn't care about the company. I just wanted my father. Don't trust them, he continued, his voice fading. Victoria. Brooke. Something's not right. Promise me you'll fight. I promise, I whispered. I promise. Dad. He died 3 days later. On a Tuesday morning while I was in the hospital cafeteria grabbing coffee. I would never forgive myself for not being there. For those last moments he spent alone. The funeral was a circus. Hundreds of people I'd never met, all offering hollow condolences while eyeing each other like sharks circling prey. Ethan stood beside me, his hand on my back. And for a moment I thought maybe this was it. Maybe tragedy would bring us back together. Maybe we could start fresh. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. I spent those days in a fog, going through Dad's things, trying to find some piece of him to hold on to. That's when I found it. A letter, hidden in his desk drawer, addressed to me in his shaking handwriting. My dearest Anya, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I can only pray I found the courage to tell you in person what I'm writing now. I failed you. I let them erase you, diminish you, treat you like you were less than. I was weak, and I convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than protecting my daughter. I was wrong. Everything I've built, the company, the legacy, it should have always been yours. You have your mother's strength, her integrity, her fire. Don't let them take it from you. The truth is in the safe deposit box at First National Lady. Box 247. The key is in my watch box. Fight for what's yours. Fight for what's right. I love you, and I'm sorry I didn't fight hard enough for you when I had the chance. Dad. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely read the words. The watch box. I'd seen Dad's collection. I knew which one was his favorite. A vintage Rolex my mother had given him. I found it in his closet, and sure enough, hidden in the velvet lining was a small brass key. But before I could go to the bank, the will reading arrived. I walked into Eleanor Porter's conference room that Wednesday, expecting to finally get the validation I'd craved my entire life. Dad had promised me. He'd told me I would inherit the company, that he'd changed the will. Eleanor had been there. She knew, but the woman sitting at the head of the table wasn't Eleanor. It was some young associate I'd never seen before, nervous and sweating, shuffling papers like he'd rather be anywhere else. Where's Eleanor? I asked. Victoria, dressed in designer black with pearls that had belonged to my mother, smiled thinly. Eleanor retired. Dear. Quite suddenly. Health issues. Apparently. Something cold settled in my stomach. But I took my seat. Ethan sat beside me. And for the first time, I noticed he wouldn't meet my eyes. Brooke sat across from us, looking like the cat that got the canary. The associate cleared his throat and began to read. I, Richard Hayes, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. What followed was a nightmare in legalese. The house, the cars, the art collection, all to Victoria, a generous trust fund for Brooke, along with a seat on the board of directors and a vice presidency at Hayes Shipping Group. To Anya Hayes, he left a single silver dollar and a note that said, "Make your own way." As I did, the room spun. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't right. This wasn't what Dad had said. I looked at the date on the will. It was from 3 years ago, long before our conversations in the hospital, long before he'd apologized. This is wrong, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He changed it. He told me he changed it. Victoria's face was a mask of false sympathy. Darling, your father was very ill at the end. The medication, the stress. People say all sorts of things. This is his true will, properly executed and notarized. But Eleanor, I turned to the associate. Eleanor Porter was supposed to handle this. Where is she? The man shifted uncomfortably. I'm not at liberty to discuss Ms. Porter's personal situation. I'm sorry for your loss, Ms. Hayes, but this is the legally binding will. I stood up so fast, my chair fell backward. No, this is fraud, he told me. He specifically told me. Brooke laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, Anya. Always so dramatic. Face it. Dad knew what he was doing. He knew who was capable of running the company and who was just a bitter little girl playing victim. That's when Ethan stood up. But instead of coming to my defense, he walked around the table and stood beside Brooke. His hand rested on her shoulder. Possessive. Familiar. The world stopped. I'm sorry, he said. But his eyes told a different story. I never meant for it to happen this way. Brooke and we tried to fight it. But how long? My voice didn't sound like my own. It was cold. Dead. 6 months. Brooke answered, smiling. Since that weekend you brought him home. Actually, we just clicked. You know. And when he told me about his financial expertise, well, Mother and I realized he'd be perfect for the CFO position. A real asset to the family business. 6 months. The entire time I'd been planning a wedding, studying for exams, sitting by my dying father's bedside. They'd been together. Using me, using my family connections to position Ethan for a job, and I'd been too stupid. Too disparity for love. Too damaged to see it. The wedding, I whispered. Obviously cancelled. Victoria said briskly, we'll handle the cancellations and vendor payments. Consider it our gift to you. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a company to run. They left me there. All of them. Ethan didn't even look back. The associate mumbled something about sending me copies of the documentation and scurried out, and I stood in that conference room, surrounded by mahogany and leather and the smell of old money, completely and utterly destroyed. I don't remember driving to the bank. I don't remember walking to the safe deposit boxes, inserting the key, opening the long metal drawer. But I remember what was inside. The original will, dated 3 weeks before Dad's death. Every word he'd promised me was there. The company, the house, everything. And beside it, a stack of documents showing financial irregularities, transfers made without board approval, money moving to offshore accounts, and a note in Eleanor Porter's handwriting. They got to me. I'm sorry. The notary on the fake will is Thomas Brennan, Victoria's cousin. The whole thing is fraud. But they have resources. Please, find someone who can fight them. Your father believed in you. I took everything. I made copies at 3 different locations. I mailed sets to attorneys in Boston, New York, and Portland. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I left. I walked away from New Haven, from the Hayes name, from everything I'd ever known. But I didn't disappear. I went to law school. I graduated top of my class. I took my mother's maiden name, Novak, and I built a reputation as one of the most ruthless and effective lawyers on the East Coast. I specialized in estate law, in family disputes, in cases where the powerful tried to crush the weak. I won every single case. And I waited. For 10 years, I waited for the universe to deliver justice into my hands. And that morning, when Eleanor's folder landed on my desk with the names Hayes Shipping Group, Brooke Hayes Vance, and Ethan Vance, CFO staring up at me, I knew the time had finally come. The pen broke because I was gripping it too tightly. Because a decade of rage and pain and cold determination had crystallized into this single moment. Someone was suing them. Some distant relative claiming Dad had promised him a stake in the company. It was a nuisance suit. Probably would be dismissed within weeks. But it meant discovery. It meant I could subpoena records. It meant I could tear apart their perfect little empire piece by piece, all under the guise of defending them. Because that's what I was going to do. I was going to take their case. I was going to defend them. And in the process of that defense, I was going to find every shred of evidence of the fraud they'd committed. I was going to expose them, ruin them, and reclaim everything they'd stolen. All perfectly legal. All completely justified. Clear my calendar. I told Eleanor when I finally released my death grip on the broken pen, I'm taking the Hayes case. She looked at me carefully. You sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The flight to New Haven felt like traveling backward through time. Every mile brought back memories I'd spent a decade trying to bury. The tree-lined streets of my childhood, The sound of the ocean, the smell of salt and old money. By the time I pulled up to the harbor where Hayes Shipping had its headquarters, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The building was exactly as I remembered it. Glass and steel and arrogance. Dad's name emblazoned across the entrance in letters 3 feet tall. His name, my name, the name they'd stolen and corrupted. I sat in the car for 20 minutes, breathing, centering myself, becoming the woman I'd spent 10 years creating. Cold, calculating, untouchable. Then I walked through those doors like I owned them, because someday soon, I would. The receptionist, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22, looked up with a professional smile. "Good afternoon. How may I help you?" Anya Novak to see Mrs. Prosection. Hayes Vance and Mr. Vance. "They're expecting me." The smile faltered slightly as she checked her computer. "Oh, yes. The attorney from Portland. Please, have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." I didn't sit. I stood in that lobby, staring at the portraits on the wall. A timeline of Hayes Shipping history. My great-grandfather, who'd started with a single fishing boat. My grandfather, who'd built the fleet. My father, young and handsome and full of dreams. And there, at the end, a portrait I'd never seen before. Brooke, in an elegant suit, her hand resting on a model ship. Every inch the corporate queen. The placard beneath read Brooke Hayes Vance, CEO. CEO. She'd taken everything. Ms. Novak. I turned to find a man in an expensive suit, probably late 50s, with the confident bearing of someone used to being important. "I'm Gerald Thorne, General Counsel for Hayes Shipping. Mrs. Hayes Vance and Mr. Vance are waiting in the conference room. If you'll follow me." We walked through corridors I'd run through as a child, past offices where I'd sat doing homework while Dad worked late, through doorways that held 1,000 memories. Gerald made small talk about the weather, the case, the company's strong position. I responded with professional courtesy while my heart hammered against my ribs. Then he opened the conference room door. And there they were. Brooke had aged well. I'd give her that. Still blonde. Still beautiful. Though there was a hardness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wore Chanel, carried Hermes, and had the kind of manicure that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. She was on her phone when we entered, waving dismissively for us to wait while she finished her call. And Ethan, God, Ethan, he'd filled out, looked successful and polished in his tailored suit, but there were shadows under his eyes, and his smile, when he stood to greet me, didn't quite reach them. He looked like a man who didn't sleep well. "Good. Ms. Novak." He extended his hand. "Thank you for coming all this way. We've heard excellent things about your work." I shook his hand, held his eyes, watched for any flicker of recognition. Nothing. 10 years. A different hair color, contact lenses instead of glasses, and a confidence I'd never had before. I was a stranger to him. Brooke finished her call with an exaggerated sigh and turned to us, her expression bored. "Finally, Gerald, please tell me you found someone competent this time." The last 3 attorneys were utterly useless. "Mrs. Hayes Vance. This is Anya Novak, from Portland. She specializes in estate disputes and has an impressive track record." Brooke's eyes raked over me, dismissive and cold. I remembered that look. I'd seen it 1,000 times growing up. It was the look that said I wasn't worth her time. Wasn't worth anyone's time. "Portland," she said, making it sound like a third-world country. How provincial. I suppose beggars can't be choosers. "Sit down, Miss Novak. Let's see if you're actually capable of handling this mess." I sat. I pulled out my portfolio, my notes, my carefully prepared questions, and I smiled. "Mrs. Hayes Vance. Mr. Vance. I can assure you, I'm more than capable. Now, why don't you start by telling me everything about this case, about the company's structure, and about your late father-in-law's estate?" Brooke's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of late father-in-law, but she launched into her version of events. How some distant cousin, third, removed, or something equally ridiculous. Was claiming Dad had promised him shares in the company decades ago. How it was clearly a money grab. How they had ironclad documentation proving the company had always been family-owned, meaning her family. How this was just another vulture trying to pick at the Hayes legacy. I took notes. I asked questions. I requested documentation, financial records, board minutes, everything. And through it all, I watched them. The way Brooke dominated the conversation, barely letting Ethan speak. The way he deferred to her on everything. His confidence from earlier, evaporating under her sharp gaze. The way she touched his arm, not affectionately, but possessively, like he was property she'd acquired. I'll need to see the original estate documents. I said, your father-in-law's will, any trusts he established, corporate bylaws, everything. Why, Brooke's tone was sharp. That's all settled. He left everything to his wife and me. There's nothing to see. Mrs. Hayes Vance. If we're going to defend against an estate claim, I need to understand the complete picture. Any competent attorney would require the same. She stared at me for a long moment, and I held her gaze. Unflinching. Finally, she waved her hand. Fine. Geralt. Get her whatever she wants. But Ms. Novak, I expect discretion. Our family's private matters are not fodder for gossip. Of course, I said smoothly. Attorney-client privilege is sacred to me. As the meeting concluded, Ethan walked me to the door. Thank you again for taking this case, he said quietly. I know Brooke can be demanding, but we really do need help with this. I looked at him. This man who'd broken my heart, stolen my future, and probably toasted to his good fortune while I rebuilt my life from ashes. Mr. Vance, I didn't come all this way to fail. I'll handle this case, and when I'm done, justice will be served. That's a promise. Something flickered in his eyes then. Some shadow of unease. But he just nodded and watched me leave. I made it to my car before I started shaking. 10 years of preparation. And seeing them had still hit me like a physical blow. But I'd done it. I'd looked them in the eyes and they hadn't recognized me. Phase 1 was complete. Over the next 2 weeks, I systematically tore apart Hayes Shipping's records. Gerald provided boxes of documents, most of which were useless. Clearly curated to show only what they wanted me to see. But I'd learned a few things in 10 years of practicing law. I knew how to read between the lines, how to spot inconsistencies, how to find the threads that, when pulled, would unravel everything. And there were threads. Lots of them. Financial transfers that didn't quite add up. Board decisions that seemed to benefit Brooke and Ethan disproportionately. Bonuses and stock options that violated corporate bylaws. It was all small. Individually defensible. But together, it painted a picture of systematic self-dealing, but I needed more. I needed the smoking gun. That's when I remembered Eleanor Porter. It took me 3 days to track her down. She'd moved to a small town in Vermont, living in a modest house that was a far cry from the Connecticut mansion she'd owned when she was Dad's attorney. When I knocked on her door that Tuesday afternoon, she answered with flour on her hands and suspicion in her eyes. Eleanor Porter. Who's asking? My name is Anya Novak. But 10 years ago, you knew me as Anya Hayes. The blood drained from her face. She gripped the doorframe like she might fall. Oh my God. Anya, little Anya. Not so little anymore. She pulled me inside, barely remembering to close the door. Her living room was small but comfortable, filled with books and photographs of children. I assumed were grandchildren. She sat me down, her hands shaking as she poured tea. Neither of us would drink. I thought about you every day, she said finally. Every single day. What I did. Letting them bully me. Threaten me. I've never forgiven myself. Tell me what happened. And she did. How Victoria had come to her office 2 days after Dad's death, with Brooke and Ethan in tow. How they'd presented their own version of the will, with a forged signature and a notary who was paid off. How they'd told Eleanor that if she didn't play along, they'd ruin her. They had photographs. They claimed of her in compromising positions. It was all lies. Fabricated. But Eleanor's husband had just had a heart attack. and she couldn't risk the stress. The scandal. The potential loss of her law license. They told me the original will had been destroyed, Eleanor said, tears streaming down her weathered face. They said no one would ever know the difference. And I was weak. I was so weak. I took their money, and I left town, and I've hated myself ever since. The will wasn't destroyed, I said quietly. Dodd left me aquí. I have the original, and I have your note. She looked up, hope and fear warring in her expression. Then you can fight them. I'm going to do more than fight them. Eleanor, I'm going to destroy them. But I need your help. I need you to testify. I need you to tell the truth about what they did. They'll come after me. They're already destroyed you once. What more can they do, and Eleanor? This isn't just about me anymore. They've been embezzling from the company for a decade. They've violated their fiduciary duties, committed fraud, and God knows what else. If we don't stop them, they'll keep hurting people. She was quiet for a long time, staring into her cold tea. Then she looked up, and I saw steel in her eyes that reminded me why Dad had trusted her. What do you need me to do? We spent the next 3 hours going over everything. Eleanor had kept copies. Bless her. Copies of the real will, of the correspondence with the notary, of the threatening letters Victoria had sent. It was all there. A complete paper trail of corruption. When I finally left Vermont that evening, my briefcase was heavy with evidence and my heart was light with purpose. But I knew the hardest part was yet to come. I had to get them to incriminate themselves, to reveal their crimes in a way that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. That's when Marcus Thorne entered the picture. I'd been staying at a hotel in New Haven, keeping a low profile while I prepared for the preliminary hearing. One evening, I was working in the hotel bar, surrounded by documents and nursing a glass of wine. I wasn't really drinking. When a man approached my table, I looked up, ready to deliver a polite dismissal, and found myself facing a man in his mid-30s with sharp green eyes and a journalist's notebook. I don't give interviews, I said automatically. I'm Marcus Thorne, investigative reporter for the New Haven Register, and I'm not looking for an interview. At least, not yet. I'm looking for the truth about Hayes Shipping Group. That got my attention. Sit down. He did, signaling the bartender for a drink before spreading several documents on the table. They were financial reports, public filings, news clippings. I've been investigating Hayes Shipping for 6 months, he said, ever since a former employee came to me with allegations of financial misconduct. But every time I get close to something concrete, my sources dry up. Documents disappear, or I get threatening calls from expensive attorneys. Why are you telling me this? Because you're their lawyer. Or at least, that's what everyone thinks. But I've been watching you, Ms. Novak. The questions you're asking, the documents you're requesting, the way you look at them when you think no one's watching. You're not defending them. You're building a case against them. Smart man. Dangerous. But smart. That's quite an accusation. It's not an accusation. It's an observation. And here's another observation. You have the kind of access I could only dream of. And I have sources, information, and a platform to expose them that you can't access from inside the legal system. I should have sent him away. Getting involved with a journalist was risky. I could compromise my case, could expose my identity before I was ready. But I was also pragmatic. Marcus was right. Together, we could do more damage than either of us could alone. What do you have? I asked. What he had was explosive. Testimonies from 3 former employees who'd been fired for questioning financial irregularities, evidence of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, photos of Brooke and Ethan at a private meeting with a known corporate raider just weeks after Dad's funeral, and perhaps most damning, a recording from a former board member who'd been pushed out, where Victoria explicitly discussed managing the will to ensure the right people inherited. If you can get me inside, get me access to the company's real books, I can connect all the dots. Marcus said, I can write a story that will bring them down even if the legal system fails. And what do you get out of this? Besides the Pulitzer Justice, my father worked for Hayes Shipping for 30 years. Richard Hayes was a good man. Liar. Honest. When he died and everything changed, They forced my dad out without his pension, breached his contract, cited performance issues that were completely fabricated. He died a year later, broken and broke. So yeah, I want justice. Same as you. We shook hands across the table. Two soldiers in a war we hadn't started, but were determined to finish. The next day, I filed a motion for expanded discovery, citing irregularities in the preliminary documentation. It was a bold move, one that would tip them off, that I wasn't the docile attorney they'd hired. But I was ready for the confrontation. It came that afternoon. Brooke stormed into the conference room where I was reviewing documents, her face flushed with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I looked up calmly. "My job, Mrs. Hayes Vance. If we're going to defend against this lawsuit, I need complete access to the company's financial history. You need what I tell you you need. I hired you to make this problem go away, not to create new ones. You hired me to defend your interests. That's what I'm doing. Unless you'd prefer to lose." She leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "I don't know what game you're playing, but you're making a very big mistake. People who cross me tend to regret it." I stood, meeting her eye to eye. "Is that a threat?" "Mrs. Hayes Vance, it's a promise." "Then I suggest you consult with your legal counsel about the wisdom of threatening your own attorney. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. And I sat back down, my hands steady, my resolve stronger than ever. She was scared. She was showing her hand. Good. The preliminary hearing was set for the following Monday. I spent the weekend preparing, going over every document, every statement, every potential line of questioning. Marcus was working his own angles, preparing his exposé to run the day after the hearing. Everything was falling into place. Sunday night. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dad, about the last conversation we'd had, about the promise I'd made to fight. I thought about the girl I'd been, small and scared and desperate to be loved. And I thought about the woman I'd become, hard and sharp and ready to burn the whole corrupt empire to the ground if that's what justice required. At 3 a.m, I drove to the cemetery where Dad was buried. His grave was in the Hayes family plot, a massive monument that Victoria had commissioned, ostentatious and cold, just like her. I sat on the damp grass, leaning against the stone, and talked to him the way I used to when I was little. "I'm going to make it right. Dad," I whispered, "I'm going to honor your real wishes, the ones they tried to bury. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about what they did to you, to me, to everyone who trusted them. I promise." The wind rustled through the trees, and for just a moment, I felt a sense of peace. Like maybe, wherever he was, Dad heard me. Like maybe he was proud of the fighter I'd become. Monday arrived cold and gray, the kind of New England morning that promised rain. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy suit that was professional but not intimidating. Subtle makeup, hair pulled back. I looked exactly like what I was supposed to be, a competent attorney representing her client's interests. The courtroom was packed. Word had gotten out about the case, probably thanks to Marcus's preliminary articles hinting at a major story. I saw reporters, business associates, curious onlookers, and sitting in the front row, dressed like they were attending a coronation rather than a hearing, were Brooke, Ethan, and Victoria. Victoria. I hadn't seen her since the will reading. She was older now, her blonde hair fading to gray, though she'd had it colored to hide it. She still wore that mask of superiority, that expression that said she was better than everyone else in the room. When her eyes passed over me, there was no recognition, just vague disdain for another faceless attorney. Judge Elias Thorne. No relation to Marcus. I was a legend in Connecticut legal circles. 70 years old, sharp as a blade, and notorious for his intolerance of bullshit. If I was going to do this, having him on the bench was both a blessing and a challenge. He wouldn't be swayed by emotion, but he also wouldn't tolerate any misconduct. The case itself was straightforward on the surface. Marcus's distant relative was claiming Richard Hayes had made a verbal promise decades ago to give him shares in the company. It was a weak claim, easily dismissed. But I'd spent 2 weeks building something else entirely. The plaintiff's attorney, a young woman named Sarah Chen, who was sharper than she looked, presented her client's case. As expected, Judge Thorne looked skeptical. When it was my turn to respond, I stood, gathered my materials, and approached the bench. Your Honor, my clients moved to dismiss this case as frivolous. However, in the course of preparing our defense, certain irregularities have come to light that I believe the court should be aware of. Brooke's head snapped up. I felt her eyes boring into my back but didn't turn around. Judge Thorne leaned forward. What kind of irregularities? Counselor, irregularities in the estate documents that form the basis of my client's ownership claim, Your Honor. Specifically, evidence that the will that was probated 10 years ago may not have been the decedent's actual last will and testament. The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. Order, Ms. Novak. Those are serious allegations. I trust you have evidence to support them. I do. Your Honor, if I may approach, I handed the clerk a thick folder, watching as it made its way to the judge. Inside was everything: the original will, Eleanor's affidavit, documentation of the forged signatures, financial records showing suspicious transfers right after Dad's death, and a formal complaint requesting the court open an investigation into estate fraud. Judge Thorne read in silence for what felt like hours. The courtroom held its collective breath. I could hear Brooke whispering urgently to Ethan, Victoria's sharp intake of breath, Gerald's muttered curses as he frantically typed on his phone. Finally, the judge looked up, his expression grave. Mrs. Hayes Vance. Mr. Vance. Approach the bench. Bring your counsel. They came forward. Brooke's face pale beneath her makeup, Ethan looking like he might be sick. I stood to the side, my heart pounding but my expression neutral. Mrs. Hayes Vance, Judge Thorne said quietly. I've reviewed these documents. They appear to show that the will that granted you control of Hayes Shipping Group may have been fraudulent. Your attorney seems to be alleging that you and your family committed estate fraud. How do you respond? Brooke's voice shook with barely contained rage. This is outrageous. My attorney has lost her mind. I want her removed from this case immediately. She's clearly incompetent. And you hired me to seek the truth. Mrs. Hayes Vance, I interrupted calmly. I found it. The fact that you don't like what I discovered doesn't make me incompetent. Who the hell do you think you are? Brooke screamed, all pretense of composure gone. Judge Thorne's gavel came down again. Mrs. Hayes Vance, control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt. As for you, Ms. Novak, you've placed me in a very unusual position. You're presenting evidence against your own clients. With respect, Your Honor, they're no longer my clients. As of this moment, I'm withdrawing from this case and filing my own complaint as an interested party. Because I am an interested party, I'm the primary beneficiary of the original will. The whispers turned to shouts. Flashbulbs went off. Reporters were typing furiously. And Brooke was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. What are you talking about? Her voice was barely a whisper. I turned to face her fully, letting her see me for the first time in a decade. Let me make it clear for you. Brooke, my name is Anya Novak. But 10 years ago, you knew me as Anya Hayes, Richard Hayes' daughter. The one you told everyone was dead. The one whose inheritance you stole. Hello, sister. The courtroom exploded. Judge Thorne was pounding his gavel, shouting for order. Brooke's face went through a progression of emotions so fast I could barely track them: shock, disbelief, recognition, fear, and finally, pure hatred. Ethan had gone completely white, gripping the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. And Victoria. Oh, Victoria. She stood so abruptly. Her chair fell backward, her mouth open in a silent scream. No, Brooke whispered. No. 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 You left. You disappeared? You're supposed to be gone. I did leave, I said, my voice steady and cold. You gave me no choice. But I never gave up my rights as Richard Hayes' daughter. And now I'm back to reclaim everything you stole. Judge Thorne finally restored order, though it took several minutes and multiple threats of contempt. When the room finally quieted, he looked at me with something that might have been respect. Miss Novak, or should I say Ms. Hayes, I'm going to need extensive documentation to support these claims. But based on what I've reviewed, I'm inclined to believe there's merit to your allegations. I'm ordering an immediate freeze on all Hayes Shipping Group assets pending a full investigation. Mrs. Hayes Vance. Mr. Vance, you are both prohibited from making any financial decisions regarding the company or its holdings. I'm appointing a special master to review the estate records and corporate books. We will reconvene in 30 days for a full hearing. He paused, his eyes sweeping across all of us. And let me be very clear. If I find evidence of fraud, forgery, or any other criminal activity, I will not hesitate to refer this case to the district attorney for prosecution. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down one final time, and chaos erupted. Reporter swam in me, shouting questions. Gerald was trying to push through the crowd to reach Brooke, who had collapsed into her chair. Sobbing, Victoria was screaming at Ethan, who looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole, and I stood in the center of it all, calm and untouchable, watching the empire I'd once been denied crumble around them. Marcus found me outside the courthouse, where I'd escaped the worst of the media circus. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen, he said, slightly out of breath. The article goes live in an hour. I've got 3 other papers ready to pick it up. By tomorrow, this will be national news. Good, I said simply. He studied me carefully. You okay? That must have been... I've been preparing for this moment for 10 years. I interrupted. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. Not really. Standing there in the cold Connecticut air, watching people stream out of the courthouse, I felt hollow. Justice was coming. Yes, they would pay for what they'd done. But it didn't bring Dad back. It didn't give me back the years I'd lost. It didn't heal the wounds they'd carved into my soul. Marcus seemed to sense my mood. For what it's worth, your father would be proud of you. I looked at him, this stranger who'd become an unexpected ally. How do you know? Because my dad told me. He worked with Richard Hayes for 30 years. Remember? Used to talk about him all the time. Said Richard's biggest regret was how he'd failed his daughter. Said if she ever came back, if she ever got the chance to fight, she'd be unstoppable. Guess he was right. My eyes burned with tears I refused to shed. Not yet. Not until this was over. The next 30 days were a whirlwind. The special master, a forensic accountant named Patricia Wells, tore through Hayes Shipping's books with the dedication of someone who loved finding buried secrets. And there were so many secrets. Offshore accounts holding millions that had been siphoned from the company. Fake invoices and phantom employees. Bonuses and stock options that violated every corporate governance rule in the book, Eleanor testified. Walking through every detail of how she'd been coerced and threatened, the forged notary broke down under questioning and admitted Victoria had paid him $50,000 to certify a fake document. 3 former board members came forward with stories of being pushed out when they'd questioned the new leadership's decisions. But perhaps the most damning testimony came from someone I never expected, Ethan. He showed up at my hotel room one night, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. I opened the door to find him standing there, rain-soaked and broken. Can I come in? Every instinct told me to slam the door in his face, but I needed to know what he wanted. I stepped aside, letting him enter but keeping my distance. You knew, he said without preamble. From the moment you took the case, you knew exactly who we were. Yes. God. He ran his hands through his wet hair, pacing my small hotel room like a caged animal. I'm so sorry, Anya, for everything, for what I did to you, for... Stop. My voice was hard. I don't want your apologies. Then what do you want? The truth. All of it. Everything that happened after I left. And he told me how Brooke had seduced him that first weekend, made him feel special and important in a way I never could because I was too damaged. Too needy. Too desperative for love. how she'd promised him power and money if he helped her consolidate control of the company, how they'd planned Dad's will fraud together. With Victoria's guidance and backing, she told me you'd given up, Ethan said, his voice breaking, that you'd signed away your rights when you left. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Because admitting the truth meant admitting I'd helped destroy an innocent person. I wasn't innocent, I said quietly. I was naive. There's a difference. You didn't deserve what we did to you. No, I didn't. But you didn't come here to confess out of the goodness of your heart. What do you want? Ethan. He looked at me with desperate eyes. Brooke is going to pin everything on me. I've seen the documents her new attorneys are preparing. They're going to say I masterminded the whole thing, that I manipulated her, that she was an innocent victim of my schemes. And Victoria will back her up. I'll go to prison while they get away with everything. Probably. I agreed. Unless you give me something I can use against them. That's why I'm here. He pulled out a USB drive from his pocket. Everything. All the offshore accounts. Every illegal transfer. Every forged document. And recordings. I've been recording our conversations for years. Insurance in case something like this happened. It's all on here. Take it. Use it. Just. Please. I know I don't deserve mercy. But I can't let them get away with destroying me the way they destroyed you. I took the USB drive. Turned it over in my hands. A small plastic rectangle that contained the complete destruction of everyone who'd hurt me. Why should I trust you? How do I know this isn't fake? Or a trap? Or more manipulation? You don't, he admitted. But Anya, I've spent 10 years married to Brooke. I know what she is. I know what Victoria is. They're monsters. And I helped them because I was weak and greedy and stupid. But I'm not going down alone. If I'm burning, they're burning with me. There was something almost admirable about his honesty in that moment. Not redemptive. Not forgivable. But at least it was real. Get out, I said. Anya, get out. I'll review what's on here. If it's as useful as you say, I'll make sure the investigators get it. But I never want to see you again. We're done. He nodded, defeated, and left. I stood there holding the USB drive, wondering if this was what victory felt like. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt tired. The final hearing was set for a cold morning in December. Exactly one day before, what would have been Dad's 65th birthday. The courtroom was even more packed than before, with national media outlets sending their best reporters. Marcus was there. Front row. Notebook, ready? Eleanor sat in the back, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Brooke and Victoria sat at the defendant's table with a team of expensive lawyers who'd taken over when Gerald wisely recused himself. Ethan sat at a separate table with a public defender. Having apparently run out of money for private counsel, they wouldn't even look at each other. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Sarah Chen, who'd pivoted from representing the nuisance lawsuit to helping me. Turned out she was brilliant, and she hated corruption almost as much as I did. Judge Thorne entered, and we all stood. He'd reviewed everything over the past month: Patricia's forensic accounting report, Eleanor's testimony, the recordings from the USB drive, financial records, witness statements, and the original will. Over 5,000 pages of documentation proving beyond any doubt what they had done. This is one of the most egregious cases of fraud I've encountered in 40 years on the bench, he began, his voice grave. The deliberate and systematic theft of an estate, the corruption of legal documents, the intimidation of witnesses, and the abuse of corporate authority for personal gain. It's unquestionably. Brooke was crying silently, mascara running down her cheeks. Victoria sat rigid, her face a mask. Ethan had his head down, defeated. I've reviewed all the evidence, and I find overwhelmingly in favor of the plaintiff, Anya Hayes. The will probated 10 years ago was fraudulent. Richard Hayes's true last will and testament, which left the bulk of his estate to his daughter Anya, is hereby recognized as valid. All assets transferred under the fraudulent will are to be returned to Miss Hayes immediately. My hands were shaking. I gripped the table to steady myself. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution on charges of fraud, forgery, witness tampering, and embezzlement. Mrs. Victoria Hayes Vance, Mrs. Brooke Hayes Vance, and Mr. Ethan Vance are to surrender their passports and are prohibited from leaving the state pending criminal proceedings. Brooke let out a wail that echoed through the courtroom. Victoria finally broke, slumping in her chair. And Ethan, he just sat there, accepting his fate with the resignation of a man who knew he deserved it. Judge Thorne turned to me. Ms. Hayes, is there anything you'd like to say? I stood slowly, feeling the weight of a decade on my shoulders. Everyone in that courtroom was watching me, waiting to see if I'd gloat, if I'd rage, if I'd take my moment of victory and grind them into the dirt. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. 10 years ago, these people took everything from me. My family, my home, my inheritance, my future. They made me feel worthless, invisible, like I didn't matter. And for a long time, I believed them. I turned to look at Brooke, at Victoria, at Ethan. But I was wrong. And so were you. Because I did matter. My father loved me, believed in me, trusted me with his legacy. And no amount of lies or manipulation or cruelty could erase that truth. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back for justice. For my father, who deserved better than to have his wishes perverted. For every employee who was cheated or fired for asking questions. For Eleanor, who was threatened into silence. And yes, for myself, because I deserved better too. Brooke was staring at me now, tears streaming down her face. Anya, she whispered. Please, I'm your sister. No, I said firmly. You were never my sister. A sister doesn't steal. Doesn't lie. Doesn't destroy someone she's supposed to love. You made your choices. Brooke. You all did. And now you have to live with the consequences. I turned back to Judge Thorne. I don't want their apologies. I don't want their excuses. I just want what was rightfully mine restored. And I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else ever again. Judge Thorne nodded solemnly. So ordered. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down. And it was over. 10 years of pain, of planning, of building myself into someone strong enough to fight back. And it was finally over. The media circus that followed was intense. Marcus's article won awards. I gave exactly one interview, to 60 Minutes, where I told my story calmly and clearly, letting the facts speak for themselves. I became briefly famous, the daughter who came back from the dead to reclaim her birthright. But I didn't enjoy the attention. I'd never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to be seen. The criminal trials took another year. Brooke got 7 years for fraud and embezzlement. Victoria got 5, though her age meant she'd probably serve less. And Ethan, who'd testified against them both. I've got 3 years and permanent disbarment from ever serving as a corporate officer again. They'd all lost everything: their wealth, their reputations, their freedom. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated. But mostly I just felt tired. Hayes Shipping Group's board of directors, once they'd been cleansed of Victoria's cronies, offered me the CEO position. It would have been the ultimate victory, stepping into the role that should have been mine all along. But I turned them down. Why, Marcus asked when I told him. We'd become friends over the months, genuine friends. And he was one of the few people who understood what this year had cost me, because taking that job would mean spending every day in a building filled with ghosts. I explained, fighting battles my father should have won, trying to reclaim a past that's already gone. That's not living. That's just surviving. So what will you do? I'm going to use my inheritance to establish a foundation. Legal aid for people who've been victimized by family fraud, estate theft, financial abuse, people who don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back like I did. I'm going to make sure my father's legacy is about helping people, not just making money. The foundation launched 6 months later. The Hayes Justice Initiative. We funded legal representation, supported forensic accountants, educated people about their rights. In our first year, we helped over 200 families recover stolen inheritances or expose fraudulent wills. It wasn't the ending anyone expected, but it was the right one. I eventually moved back to New Haven, but not to the Hayes mansion. That I sold, donating the proceeds to several charities my mother had supported. Instead, I bought a small cottage by the water, with a view of the ocean and enough space for the life I was building. A simple life, a peaceful life, a life that was entirely my own. 1 year after the final verdict, on what would have been Dad's 66th birthday, I went to the cemetery. The ostentatious monument Victoria had commissioned was gone, replaced with a simple headstone I'd chosen: Richard Hayes. Beloved father. He believed in justice. I sat on the grass beside his grave, just like I had the night before the trial, and talked to him. I told him about the foundation, about the lives we'd changed, about how I'd finally found peace. I told him I forgave him for not fighting harder, because I understood now that he'd done the best he could with the strength he had. I hope I made you proud, Dad, I whispered. I hope wherever you are, you know that justice was done, that your real wishes were honored, that I didn't give up. The wind rustled through the trees, warm and gentle, and I smiled, because I knew the truth now. The truth I'd spent 10 years learning. Justice isn't about revenge. It's not about destroying your enemies or reclaiming what was stolen. Justice is about truth. It's about standing up and saying, this was wrong, and I won't pretend it wasn't. It's about refusing to be invisible anymore. It's about knowing your worth doesn't depend on whether anyone else sees it. And it's about transforming pain into purpose, loss into legacy, and betrayal into a reason to fight for everyone who can't fight for themselves. That's what justice really is. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to demand it, patient enough to work for it, and strong enough to see it through, justice is exactly what you get. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Have you ever been made to feel invisible, worthless, less than? What did you do about it? Did you fight back? Or did you walk away? There's no wrong answer. But I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that you're stronger than you think and that justice is worth fighting for, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps me share more stories of courage, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right, because we all deserve to be seen. We all deserve to matter. And we all deserve justice. Thank you for listening to my story.